to say, your background, is that your face or not? I didn't know.
Yeah.
Yep, but that's a Starbucks. All right. Just admitting the waiting room. Give us another minute or so and we'll get started. As always. Oh, hi, Josh Davis. Nice to see your face this morning. I love the convenings and seeing all our friends. I think we have close to 90 something registered, so we'll just give it one more minute and then we'll get started. Morning, Pastor Liz. All right, Jesse, you think we're good to go?
Yes.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Great to see you all and some guests from our national partnership and other communities as well. I'm excited by our conversation today because it focuses on one of my favorite topics, which is advocacy and policy. And we're especially excited to have our guests from the School and State Finance Project with us to lead a really exciting and engaging workshop. We know Zoom fatigue is real, and they've put together a really great interactive workshop. So we're excited about that. But I just, want to acknowledge for anyone who read my opening in the newsletter earlier this week, what it just truly difficult, time we're living in, and 2 years into this almost, just the constant bombardment of kind of this toxic stress that we live in. And we see it kind of oozing all over the community and our lives, and things feel a little bit out of control. And also here in Norwalk, of course, being fresh off a couple really terrible weeks of school lockdowns and threats. And of course, we know, unfortunately, just how real that can be, as this morning at this almost very moment marks the anniversary of the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School. I know you all know how much I worked there, and it's a personally very tough day for me and many of you. All the more reason why we need to be focusing on kind of each other and building community and self-care. Tomorrow we'll be releasing a special edition newsletter that's focused on social emotional health just in time for the holiday break. And we know this break can't come soon enough for many of you, including us. We're all kind of army crawling to the holidays, it feels like. So our offices are going to be closed between Christmas and New Year's, and we're going to get some downtime and rest. And we hope that you all will do that too and spend time connecting with your loved ones. But as we think about this last year, despite all the challenges, there is really so much to be celebrated as well. We all know how fortunate we are in so many ways. And, one of the things we reflect on is just how grateful we are that all of you continue to show up for children and youth in this community and commit to collaborating to achieve better outcomes for the children and youth in our city. So we want to highlight one story in particular, our partners at Strive. And I mentioned Josh a minute ago. Josh's wonderful partner from Strive Together. They put together a terrific video that highlights some of our prenatal third grade initiative work. And some of you have already seen it. It's less than 2 minutes, but if you haven't, please get your screen in full view mode and enjoy just a couple minutes of this wonderful video.
How does collaborative action help a community get better results for youth and families? Just look at Norwalk ACTS in Norwalk, Connecticut. Collaborative action is when members of a partnership collectively adopt the tools and processes and build the necessary knowledge and skills to make powerful contributions that shift policies, practices, resources, and power structures leading to equitable cradle-to-career outcomes. Norwalk ACTS, a Strive Together network member focused on child outcomes, set a goal to ensure that children in Norwalk, Connecticut enter kindergarten ready to learn. Historically, there was little infrastructure or system for consistently screening young children in Norwalk across different sectors from birth to when they enter kindergarten. Norwalk ACTS and its members focus specifically on implementing a standardized process for screening, tracking, and promoting child development across early childhood service sectors by increasing the use of developmental screening with the Ages and Stages questionnaire, a developmental screening tool. They develop strategies, partnerships, and a continuous improvement model to engage the community. The work started small to identify points of failure and pivot accordingly. They engaged 23 community partners at each developmental touchpoint to complete ASQ screenings with children and their parents. As home visiting agencies taught parents how to use the tool, they equipped parents to be their child's very best first teacher. With the entire community focused on the same goals and shifting practices accordingly, kindergarten readiness increased 7 percentage points over the course of 2 school years. Learn more at strivetogether.org.
So Josh, you can share with the Strive team that we were in a meeting with some partners saying, if only we had a video to describe this work. And it was about 28 minutes later that Jesse texted and said, did you see this video Strive just put up? So we're super grateful and a wonderful highlight, and want to thank, there's so many people to thank. We just on the slide put some of our school readiness providers, but also so many others, the city and Norwalk Public Schools, the Early Childhood Council, FCA, Child Guidance, 211 Child Development, University of Hartford, so many of you who have worked so hard on this work for many years, and it shows. So thank you so much. That website, that video is on our website and our newsletter, so please share widely. It's so hard to describe our work, and this is a really nice, concise way to give an example of what this looks like. Want to move on and just talk for a few minutes about a few reminders in terms of our governance structure. Normally, our December meeting is where we elect our new board of directors. And if you remember, and we're part of our September convening, where I mentioned that we are moving that to June to line up with our fiscal year, which starting a few years ago began on July 1st. So that will board change will happen in June. Members are welcome to reach out to me if you or others are interested in joining the board. But we will change our executive committee for January 1st, which includes Nancy Von Euler, who will become our new chair. Reverend Liz will be our vice chair. Kate Ritter will remain as secretary. Charlie Allred as treasurer, and Kathy will move to immediate past chair. And I can't see her on my screen. I'm assuming she's here somewhere, but just a special shout out to Kathy DeCesare, who has been our board chair for a number of years and really helped move from our advisory board to our nonprofit board when we became a 501c3, and just appreciate just how much she has done over the many years. She has been just a steadfast supporter of Norwalk ACTS since its inception, and she is, we are deeply grateful for her. So we will also in June do our Sally Gross Award and our new Anthony Allison Ubuntu Award. So stay tuned for that as well. So moving on, before I turn it over to Jesse, just want to remind, you've heard me talk about this in a number of ways for the last year, really talking about this language of micro, meso, macro work. And we've spent some time over the last few months getting you more familiar with our community advocate program, our community engagement work. And today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the macro work involved in changing policies and practices that's really necessary for population level change to occur. But as you'll see, this presentation and engaging workshop really connects the two because macro change relies on micro engagement, right? It's the individuals connecting with elected officials and decision makers to share their stories and experiences. I don't think Senator Duff is on the call this morning, but he and I spoke a couple months ago, and he said it was my advocacy on a particular personal issue that I advocate for every year that changed his mind on this issue. He said it was your story year after year that really moved the needle for me on this. So we're going to talk today about how we all become better storytellers and using our voice for change. The cornerstones that you've also heard us talk about today will focus again on our policy and advocacy. And in September, we spent some time on our equity and justice. And in June on the engagement. March, we will look forward to another data walk with Paula and Ray on a lot of our data work. And just to make a connection between the initiatives and the cornerstones, I want to highlight, recently we met with the prenatal third grade work group, and there's a new, Connecticut passed a bill last year to expand Medicaid coverage for postpartum care for women from what was 60 days to a full year. That is what the kind of change we're talking about that is going to have a direct impact on women, especially minority women in our community. As if you don't know, the US has one of the highest maternal mortality rates of any developed country in the world, especially for BIPOC women. And so this change is going to mean that they will be able to access the care that they need for a full year after birth. So those are the kinds of things we're talking about, how that connects to kind of our initiatives in the middle and why this work is so important. So before I turn it over to Jesse to keep going, I just wanted to highlight many of you have met Brandon. I don't know if we can spotlight Brandon for a moment, but Brandon Hayden is our new policy director, Cradle to Career. He is embedded within Norwalk ACTS, but serving the other our three sister Cradle to Career partnerships: Stanford Cradle to Career, Bridgeport Prospers, and Waterbury Bridge to Success. But he is anchored within Norwalk ACTS. And prior to this role, Brandon was a legislative aide in Senate Democrats of the Connecticut General Assembly and helped form and pass many legislative bills, including providing students with non-traditional pathways to bachelor's degrees. And his passion for improving the lives of Connecticut's youth stemmed from his upbringing, being raised in an immigrant family from Nicaragua who did not have equitable access to resources. And the lack of education on those resources led to him not having fluid college engagement. And so that really was kind of transformative to him and getting involved in legislative policy work. And we are so thrilled. He's spent many of his years growing up in Norwalk and is a community member of Norwalk still today. So welcome to Brandon. And that's it for me. I'm going to turn it now over to Jesse, but welcome to everyone.
All right, so before we kind of share more about our policy and advocacy process and strategic planning over the past few months, we kind of just want to look back at some of the things that we did over last legislative session. This was kind of the first session that we really engaged in the policy and advocacy space. And so one particular thing we want to highlight is our advocacy work around ECS funding. That's education cost sharing. So last legislative session, we co-signed a letter alongside the mayor, the superintendent, and the Board of Education, urging Governor Lamont to reconsider freezing the ECS funding, which would negatively impact Norwalk Public School students. So the governor's proposal delayed a 10-year rollout of school funding to 12 years, and it would have been detrimental to our students. By freezing this grant at kind of the 2020, 2021 levels, Norwalk Public Schools would have lost $1.3 million in state funding through the biennial budget. And at the time of the pandemic and with everything happening, the money is just even more important for our students. So on March 4th, we issued a legislative action alert to our membership, which was the first time we've done that to raise concerns around the inequitable funding for Norwalk Public School students. In addition to adding co-signatures to our letter, we provided information about the hearing and ways to advocate. And we were able to collect 137 signatures in like 36 hours. And a lot of those signatures were from parents, staff members of Norwalk Public Schools, and concerned community members. And so this written testimony also joined over 100 submissions from others across the state, including our partners who are today from the School and State Finance Project, and kind of disapproval of freezing the ECS funding for our students. Additionally, we were able to collect 5 powerful oral testimonies on behalf of Norwalk. And this particular hearing really lingered late into Tuesday night, around midnight Tuesday night. And leading up to that public testimony, our message was definitely successfully heard by Representative Dathan, who's the Vice Chair of Appropriations. We were also in communication with all our legislators at the time and emailing back and forth. Other Norwalk legislators had also expressed kind of the similar concerns that Representative Dathan did, and the General Assembly proposed a budget without the cuts, which the governor ultimately signed. So we see it as a big success that money was able to kind of get reinstated for Norwalk. And this is just kind of like a timeline of the events that took place. Other things we just want to highlight from the previous session, we have also provided testimony on other key bills that relate to our cradle to career efforts. So SB 1 and SB 1034, we were in strong support of SB 1 because it would declare racism as a public health crisis in the state and establish a commission to study the impact of institutional racism on public health and provide proposals to address disparities. And Senator Bob Duff actually read an excerpt from Jennifer's testimony on the General Assembly floor, and SB 1 ultimately passed last session. And we were also in support of SB 1034, which was an act concerning minority recruitment and retention of teachers. And we've heard that loud and clear from both students, parents, and educators that this is one of the highest priorities here in Norwalk. This language was ultimately incorporated into another bill, SB 1202. We also, in partnership with the Center of Youth Leadership, we just provided a platform for really the Center of Youth Leadership to have a Board of Education forum for the candidates prior to the election. And Jennifer, along with our 3 other sister organizations here in Connecticut from Strive Together, were able to meet with Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, and as well as our Strive partner here as well. So these are just some of the highlights we wanted to share. And really, I'm going to transition now into our efforts over the last few months. So we realized we entered the last session without really a plan in place and kind of just dove right into it. So in May, we formed a Policy and Advocacy Taskforce. And when developing this process, we borrowed best practices from other Strive Together partners who are engaging in this policy and advocacy space. And our goal was to have these different steps in place prior to the 2022 legislative session. And so each step was a collective effort with community members, organization partners, and backbone staff. And once we created this task force, we then developed a purpose statement. And from that purpose statement, built these guiding principles and created a level of engagement tool, which you will hear more about. And we're excited to share that with you today. We actually have some members from the Policy and Advocacy Task Force here who are going to kind of present the next steps. So I'm going to turn it over to Heidi to share more about the task force.
Hi there, I'm Heidi Alterman. I am both on the Common Council now, and I have 2 children in the Norwalk Public Schools, and a 3rd one will be there next year. So I've been in the Policy and Advocacy Task Force since it began, and we get input from over 20 community members and feedback. We've had 6 meetings and sent out a survey. The purpose of the task force was to define the Policy and Advocacy Cornerstone and develop a process for how we collectively lead, advocate, and support policies. While policy and advocacy work is embedded in Norwalk ACTS initiatives, our task force serves as an additional access to include community in our collective work. Eventually, we think that the group can be helpful with meeting with elected officials, mobilizing advocacy efforts such as trainings, education, and issue awareness, letter writing, testimony, phone calls, emails, etc. Our process has been pretty good so far. I would say, like I mentioned, there's been 20 community members. We've definitely had some meetings that were a little bit more intense, but all the meetings I've been able to attend, people were really excited to be there. And it's nice to have input from people within government and then people from the community.
Thanks, Heidi. Next, we'll hear from Dewan.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dewan Wiggins, the executive director of the Youth Business Initiative. I was about to say the Norwalk Act. But I also grew up in Norwalk, a long-time resident of Norwalk. My kids are not in the Norwalk system, but hopefully one day they will be. But I just want to go over the purpose statement and guiding principles. Policy and Advocacy Cornerstone purpose statement. We engage, educate, and empower community members and partners to be civically active and advocate for equitable policies across the cradle to career continuum. Some of our guiding principles: we create an exclusive environment where community members are empowered to participate in civic discourse and self-advocacy. We provide data, resources, and training that educate community members on key issues and equip them to effectively advocate for change. We engage community members in conversations about their vision for Norwalk and create opportunities for civic participation with policymakers and elected officials. We support advocacy efforts that center the voice and lived experience of community members, along with quantitative data to influence change.
Thanks, Dewan. Next, we're going to hear from Doreen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Doreen Marr Anderson. I also grew up in Norwalk. I have two daughters that attend Norwalk High and Nathan Hale. I'm on the Norwalk High SGC, and I'm also a Norwalk ACTS community advocate. We don't have the capacity to lead advocacy efforts for every policy we believe in. So we wanted to define what each level of engagement looks like in terms of support and commitment from both members and backbone staff. These definitions are an overview, and in a moment, we'll walk you through an example of what each level of engagement looks like. So levels of engagement here. So on the support level, the policy is related to our mission. We will help advance this policy and support those taking the lead. In terms of the advocate level, we'll have 3 to 4 policies. The policy strongly aligns with our mission. We will dedicate time and resources to help the advancement of the policy. And in terms of the lead level of engagement, we're looking at probably 1 to 2 policies. The policy is crucial to our mission. We are taking the position to advocate and support it at the highest level through multiple levels of advocacy and engagement. Okay, so for the support level, a policy concept example could be adopt a universal mail-in voting in Connecticut. While this policy falls outside of the scope of our mission, we may lend support to advocates of election reform to help ensure that all residents have safe and secure access to voting. So in terms of member commitment for support, it could look like signing on letters to delegation, calls to legislators' office, providing insight if applicable to backbone support on key stakeholders. And in terms of the backbone supports for support level, we would create and disseminate sign-on letters, maintain communications with members and community on priorities, maintain templates for form emails and testimony, and postcard letter writing campaign organizing.
Thanks, Doreen. Next, we'll hear from Michael.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Michael Crafter. I'm the Student Success Manager with the Norwalk Housing Authority Learning Centers, and been a lifelong resident of Norwalk and been a part of Norwalk ACTS as a member since 2015. So I would like to talk about sort of some of the example for advocacy. So a policy concept could be the allocation of funds to create a baby bond program, which will allocate funding to a trust for a child born in poverty that will grow over the child's lifetime. This policy may fall within our values and mission. We will advocate for the funding of this program to ensure that the children who need the most monetary support will receive these allocation funds to prepare them for their future. In addition to the comments and commitments and to the supports from the previous slide, the commitments and supports are increased for this level. And we're going to look at the 2 levels of the support. So for member commitment, for advocacy. It can be utilizing connections with key stakeholders to identify key partners and potential obstacles. It can be recruit members from within organizations or outside of it to help mobilize efforts. It can be disseminate information of advocacy efforts, emails from signups, sending testimonies, and attending events. It can also be continuously engaged with decision makers. And then for backbone staff, in terms of advocacy, it could be identify coalitions and organizations working in the space to collaborate with and align work. It can be provide a toolkit for advocacy from emails, testimony examples, legislator office context. It could be track a legislative process and inform members and communities with details, or it can be a call to action sent out to membership in the community.
Thanks, Michael. And last we'll hear from Dominique.
Might be having bandwidth issues. Oh, she's dropped off and is right back on.
Dominique, are you with us?
Just made it back.
All right.
Can everyone hear me all right?
You're up. Perfect
Thank
timing.
you. I'm up. All right. Good timing. Good timing. Thank you all. Hi, I'm Dominic Johnson. I am on the Norwalk Common Council. I've been a part of this Policy and Advocacy Taskforce from the beginning, and to join my colleagues in talking about some of the work we've been doing. This example is one where this group could take the lead with those one or two policies. There is a concept that would be really central to Norwalk ACTS values and mission, strongly resonates with it. It could be, for example, expanding access to mental health resources for children and young adults. And so Norwalk ACTS would lead the effort to ensure that all of Norwalk's youth population could receive and benefit from mental health care. And this Policy Advocacy Taskforce could take the lead in that. So in addition to the commitments and supports from the previous slide, lead commitments would increase for this level. And so the member commitment for lead would be that you could engage with legislators to inform on key policy initiatives, leveraging key members to effectively communicate, utilizing connections to spread awareness of policy initiatives, and or employing use of media outreach, especially social media, news, papers, letters to the editor. And then lastly, having the backbone supports for the lead would be a grassroots organization of the community, providing members and community with resources to understand the issue. It's like fact sheets, visuals, infographics, and then providing a map for members of Norwalk ACTS with key decision makers connected to the issue.
Thanks, Dominique. So a big thank you to all our Policy and Advocacy Task Force members. We had several meetings over the last few months, and we feel like we're in a better place with more of a plan, a purpose, and kind of what our role is as both members of Norwalk ACTS, as well as our role as backbone staff in this policy and advocacy space. So over the next few months, we'll start to kind of investigate the issues that we think are that align with our mission, as well as trying to see what's feasible and what legislators are talking about to make sure that things that we're talking about are being spoken about in the rest of the state. So with that, before we turn it over to the workshop that we have for today that really ties in with those principles, I just want to review our Norwalk ACTS kind of conversation norms, because this will be an engaging workshop. The first is to listen and to be open to different perspectives and experiences. The second is to show respect and suspend judgment. The third is to disagreement is an opportunity to expand our perspectives. The fourth is to check your assumptions and assume positive intent. Fifth is to be purposeful and to the point. And then sixth is to step up, please participate. But also, if you're participating too much, step back and allow other voices into the dialogue. And with that, super excited to turn it over to the School and State Finance Project to walk us through the next piece of our convening.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Erica Haynes, and I am the Director of Community Engagement at the School and State Finance Project. So we're going to be speaking to you today about navigating policy and advocacy in a way that hopefully allows you all to support Norwalk ACTS on all three levels, right? Support, advocate, and lead. I have put in the chat a link tree, which will actually have all the links you'll need for this presentation and going forward. And let me just share my screen so that you all can see first and foremost that link tree. You have access to the presentation that we're showing you today. In that link tree, you have the breakout actions so that you don't furiously have to write down notes before going into a breakout room. You have our website to access who we are and what we're about. The website to the General Assembly so that you can connect with decision makers, and to the Board of Education, and a few additional resources about public narrative and storytelling. And then you also have the ability to subscribe to our newsletter and schedule a meeting with myself or my colleague Jen Nakos, who is also on the call today. So I want to start by just sharing a little bit about who we are and what we do. The School and State Finance Project was started in 2015, and it was really started as school finance only, looking at how does Connecticut distribute its financial resources to our public schools, and is there a more equitable and transparent way? And since then, we've expanded into the state finance realm as well. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit, and we have grown from a team of 4 when we started to a team of 12. And we do things like this and educate you all on what's happening up at the General Assembly when it comes to school finance or issues of state finance. So we're going to get started because today is really about navigating policy and advocacy. And so as we get started, I'm just going to let you know you have our contact information here and again on the link tree to if you want to schedule a meeting with us. We are going to be using the chat and relying on the chat. So stretch your typing fingers, get ready to go to drop things in. But I want to tell you first what we're going to tackle today in our time together. We're going to address what policy is and how we can connect with it. What are our opportunities? What is advocacy? Why do we use storytelling? And how do I build my story? How do we build relationships with decision makers? And how do we advocate? And how do I share my story to change policy? As Jennifer Barahona shared that she was able to share her story and affect policy decision. So understanding policy, as we get started, I would love for you to drop in the chat, how confident are you currently about interacting with what we call policy, right? Are you very confident? Are you somewhat confident? Are you hesitant, or are you not confident at all? I'd love to hear where you're at with that. And we're going to start with what is policy. So policy refers to, sorry, I'm going to move my screen and move the chat here. Policy refers to a set of guidelines designed for decision making. So when we talk about policy, we're talking about what people rely on in order to make systems decisions. So you interact with policy every day. We all do. It might be the return policy at Walmart. It might be the attendance policy at our children's school. But policy provides those rails to say, Walmart to say, you don't have a receipt, here's what you need to do with it, or your child was out, we need a note. So we're interacting with policy every day, but today we're going to really focus on the context of government and public policy. And with that said, we're talking about what the government, right, local, the state, or the federal government chooses to do or not to do about a problem. So public policy has a couple of parameters. I think I'm having bandwidth issues and glitching on my scroll. Here we go. Yeah, it really jumped ahead on me, you guys. Public policy. Public policy is made in response to an issue or a problem that requires attention. It might be, and actually we're seeing an issue in Hartford. They're testing hidden lights at stoplights, as hidden cameras at stoplights in Hartford. Right now in Connecticut, we don't use those. So there's an issue that requires attention, and they're looking at, is there a change to policy that needs to happen in order for us to fix this issue? The overarching issue is people running red lights. It might be a law or it might be a regulation. It is made on behalf of the public, and it focuses on a goal, a solution to the problem. So in this example of Hartford and red light traffic cameras, the problem is that in Hartford, and for those of you who drive in Hartford, I think you can probably nod in agreement to this, red light running in Hartford is pervasive. That's the problem. Well, we need to keep the general public safe. That's why it becomes a part of public policy. And it is made by government, although the ideas can come from outside of government. So Norwalk ACTS, as an organization, has the ability to say, we have an idea to solve a problem that should become a policy, whether it is a law or a regulation. And it's an ongoing thing. So policy making doesn't have a beginning and an end. It's ongoing because, you know, in my example of the red lights in Hartford, first we need to study to see how much of a problem is it, and with this proposed solution, would it fix the problem? And then we need to monitor, once that becomes a policy, is it working? Did we get it right? Did we get it wrong? And there are some fine differences that I just want to hit out here on the difference between a law or policy and regulations. So a law and policy is what generally guides decision making. For example, policy states all students must have written parental permission to participate in high contact sports like football. The policy has been determined. It's non-negotiable. So if I called up my child's high school and this policy was in place, and I say, I'm giving you my verbal consent, it's not good enough. And I would expect that the administrators would say that. Regulation is how the policy is actually carried out in practice. So regulation might allow for a form to be sent home with the student rather than me generating a letter and sending it in and signed by the parent, returned to the school. So I want to just talk about the different levels of policy, because we're going to talk about what our interactions are today, but we're really going to focus more on the local and state. But I want to be clear, there is a hierarchy. Federal policy generally overrides state policy, and state policy generally overrides local policy. But if we look within the context of schools, the federal example might be standardized testing. The federal government requires standardized testing. And so as a state, we can't say, we've decided we don't believe in tests. Well, federal policy trumps state policy. State examples might be the education cost sharing, or how funds get to the local public school district. COVID guidelines are another great topic. And local examples might be bullying, policies around suspension or expulsion, or trans and gender expansiveness within a district. So there's a process for passing policy. And this is very general. And I want you, when you see this, to think about, this can happen at your local Board of Ed or Common Council in Norwalk. It could happen at either of those. It might happen at a state level. What we see is the idea or issue is brought to the group. So some member of the governing body submits an idea for discussion. Might be a bill that is sponsored by a representative and brought to the agenda. And then somebody who is in charge of that agenda has to say, sure, we will put it on the agenda. So everybody can't even get their ideas onto the agenda. It goes into committee, gets voted into committee so that people can talk about it, discuss it, and draft it. And then the committee would vote on it and move it out of committee, send it to whatever the voting body is, and then it would be added to that greater agenda, debated on and voted on. So there is a process, and I want to think back to some of the work Jesse shared with us at the beginning about what last legislative session looked like and how many opportunities along the way Norwalk ACTS had to interact with policy that was happening at the state legislature. So it is a process. Now, here's the tricky part, you guys. Policy is not written for us. It absolutely is not. And in Connecticut, it is even more difficult. Policy is written for a legislative audience, not a community one. And these small words like must versus shall have huge meaning differences. So something that I might not pick up on is that small of a difference. If it says must, if it says they shall, but those have very different meanings when it's enacted into law. It is absolutely normal to struggle to understand what the policy actually means. Don't get discouraged. I think that when we look at policy out in community, it is so overwhelming and frustrating. And then, it's easy for us to think we must not be getting it. Everybody else must be understanding this, and this might be a me thing. I'm promising you, as we embark in today, it is not a you thing. So feel free to read proposed policy. And in this legislative session, when you get policy information from Norwalk ACTS, no, it is not a you thing, and you can kind of barrel through this policy. And even when a policy says something very specific, it still could be executed differently. So you might want to look at where that's happened before. Talking to other people who are involved in policy might be a part of it. And I'll give you a great example of this. Last year, we had some significant school funding reforms passed that Jesse mentioned. We were very much in the lead on during that legislative session. Some of it got passed, some of it is kind of on hold, and they're running the numbers. So we ran the numbers, and now the state is going to run the numbers and make sure that good fiscal policy is attached to the proposals before they get heard again this session. Our concern is that if they don't read the policy the way we read the policy, the numbers could be different. So even when all experts are in the room, there needs to be sometimes a really clear conversation about how are you hearing this? And so again, my point in sharing this with you is so that you understand that policy is not made to be simple. It is kind of elusive. And the cool thing is, look, we've got 76 people on this call today. When you think about that, you can turn to, Jennifer Barahona and say, help me understand this. You can reach out to MJ and say, I want to talk about this because I'm not sure I'm hearing this right. And I would encourage you to do that as we dive into policy. But one of the questions we always hear is this a good policy? right? And that's such a depends. It depends where you're sitting and if it's good. But if you want to know if this is a good policy, you can develop a checklist just for yourself. Is this acceptable for the community? Is it okay for us? In Jesse's earlier action example, the governor's budget had proposed not adding new education funding for Norwalk Public Schools through the education cost sharing. That was not acceptable for the community of Norwalk, and it did not make sense to have that policy. And the next question is it a policy created to prevent damage to a community, or was it created after damage was inflicted? And this one, it's a little hard to pin down. If we're talking about freezing new funding for education, it certainly wasn't created to prevent damage, but it didn't mitigate damage either. Does it help create a more positive culture? As parents, for those of you who have had kids going through the school system, we look at those policies that come home with our kids each year to go, how is this creating a positive culture? What is going on? Uniforms have always been an example of what people believe for schools creates a positive culture. Next question you can ask is, do people need this policy to guide major decisions, or is it just a safeguard so nobody gets crazy? And how do people in the community feel about this policy? One thing you're going to hear from me over and over today is that talking to people is super important, bringing it all around. There are some key areas of policy analysis. If we build on that last slide, when did it or does it go into effect? What's it supposed to address? Can we explain what this means or does? How does it impact our community? What are the benefits? What are the problems? And most importantly, what would you change about this policy? So what I've given you, your first suitcase of equipment to deal with policy and advocacy in a legislative session, is there are a lot of questions, you guys, and it's okay to ask a lot of questions, and it's okay not to have all of the answers. So in our first breakout action, and Jen Nakos, if you can drop the Linktree in the chat again, we have our first breakout action, and I'm going to have you in very small groups, rooms of 3 people, tiny, right? And the goal here is to understand how and when you may have advocated previously, and to build an understanding of how others have done the same. So when you go into this breakout room, you're going to share your name and how you're connected to Norwalk ACTS. And then you are going to share, have you ever advocated for or even against a policy before? If so, I'd love for you to share with your group what that was. And if not, you can share why not. You have about a minute per person, and I would ask that someone jump in and volunteer to be the timekeeper in that breakout space. The next thing I'm going to ask you is, what's one thing that would make it easier for you to interact with policy proposals or changes? What's that one thing that would, if you've advocated before, would make it even easier? And if you haven't advocated, what would make it easier for you to get that start going? So I'm going to stop the share now, and we are going to go in those rooms of 3. Do not panic. You can't get this wrong. Enjoy.
Emily, and am I in a room or should I just go to any room? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. You are. Let me just go grab you. Not letting me move you.
What room should I be in?
You can go to any room at this point. Room 11 is fine. You see it? Hayden. How's everybody coming back?
There were the two of us.
You were the group with two. Okay. Room
Yeah,
10.
we didn't have someone join us, so.
Cool. You're on mute. Danique.
Of course I am. My best material is always on time, off time. Are you keeping time? Because
Sure am.
okay. Of course you are. You're the best.
It's a big job. Somebody's got to do it. So I get paid the big bucks. Got my timer. And then Jen, in between, before we go to breakout group 3 with the 7 different groups, how much time will I have to actually, I have the leaders like in their rooms, but to sort through people?
What do you mean to sort? You mean to assign people?
Right.
So the breakout 3.
Right. When you guys come back from 2,
Yeah.
are you having a discussion?
Yes. Yeah. There'll be between 2 and 3. There'll be a good, sort of. Let me just check. Which. Yeah, you'll have time.
Okay, great, thanks. It's so funny, like you can like prepare breakout rooms and stuff, and then based on who's in, who's out, who's muted, who's this, who's that. So I just wanted to make sure I had enough time just to move everything around.
Yeah, so once they go to breakout 2, we'll come back, and then Erica will spend some time talking about like who is your audience,
Okay.
talking a bit more about like creating your story. So you'll definitely have some time.
Awesome, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Danique, the wallpaper's looking good.
All right, we'll get everybody to get their bearings a little as you were whisked out of that breakout room, probably in mid-sentence, as you were just like, yes, yes, you were identifying with somebody and poof, you're back here. So as people are coming back, what I'm going to ask you to do is to drop in the chat. The first thing I want to know from you is what came up as one kind of barrier to advocacy action for folks. And I'm going to give an example of one that didn't come up in my room. I'll let those folks share theirs, but one that I come across a lot is like people just simply saying to me, I don't know how I'm supposed to dress. Like, am I supposed to dress up? I don't have nice clothes to go talk to somebody. And the one thing I'm going to tell you from my perspective is being yourself is the perfect person to be. You don't have to be anybody else, and you don't have to dress like anybody else. So start dropping in the chat what is one thing that can help remove barriers to advocacy. And I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. And we're going to talk about, now that we've kind of touched on policy, I'm going to give my screen a minute to catch up to me. We're going to talk about advocacy. So advocacy in its broadest terms, when we talk about advocacy, it sounds really formal. And really, this is when you take any action supporting a cause or pleading a case. It's about having your voice heard and considered when decision makers are considering policy decisions. And some examples are like you might make phone calls, you might email elected officials, you might write an op-ed or a letter to the editor, and you might even just have a lawn sign up. Those are advocacy opportunities. And so I listed a bunch of them out here. Speaking at a Board of Ed meeting, attending a rally, sharing a post on social media. That's advocacy. So it doesn't have to be this dramatic grand gesture that sidelines you from everything else in your life for days. A little about me. I have 4 kids. So my oldest is 27, but my youngest is 12. So the hits just keep coming for me. And one of the things is teaching, each of those children. My son, I had 3 girls and now a boy. Totally different animals, y'all. But my son, we're really struggling with self-advocacy. Now, if you don't understand that grade, you need to ask your teacher. I'm not going to advocate for you until you advocate for you. So advocacy is about having your voice heard in a memorable way. And we're going to talk a little about including your story. And when I say your story, that is shorthand for your lived experiences. And why that's essential for advocacy, we'll talk about, but we're going to talk about how your story matters and how you can add to your story in your advocacy. So I'm really a nerd when it comes to storytelling. I love storytelling in so many ways. And for those of you who switch the voices when you read and stuff for your kids, right? There's this storytelling, it's a fun space to be in. But also, science tells us that more areas of the brain are activated through story than with fact alone. You want people actively listening when you advocate. Experiencing emotions enhances memory. So if you want me to remember what you're telling me, you're going to tell me and connect it to a story. You're going to light my brain up and you're going to make me feel something, because there are a lot of issues competing for attention. And I want to remember when every one of you tells me your story. So don't just say, this is a good policy, please vote for it. That doesn't move hearts, it doesn't move minds. And one of the things in storytelling is connection points are created between a listener's experience and the person who is telling the story. That's what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to be like, we get each other, right? You're hearing me, and I want you to understand why your vote on this matters. So, this time I'm going to challenge you a little bit more to light up the chat. And I want to see a busy chat. I want to see you all waking up here. And I want you to think for a minute about a story someone told you that you remember. And we've all heard stories from our friends. And I want you to think about this, right? Now we're in Zoom and the story is missing. But when you go in to the office on a Monday, you ask people, how was your weekend? They don't give you a numeric rating. It was a 7. and move on, right? They tell you about their weekend. They tell you about their holiday. They tell you about the disaster of a deep fried turkey. So you go, I will never do that again because now I know what happened at his house. So I'm never even going to try that. And I want you to throw in the chat, what made it memorable? What is that story someone told you that you're like, when I think of stories, I think of this one? And I'd love for you to drop that in the chat because we're going to use those kind of ideas going forward, and Norwalk ACTS will be able to kind of think about, are we telling memorable stories? So drop that into the chat and we're going to start talking about storytelling as we go. There are essentially 3 critical components to storytelling. And there are a lot of ways to tell a story. The first thing I'm going to tell you is there's no wrong way. If you're sharing your story, you're doing it right. That's the first thing. But when we tell a story and try to connect it to policy and public policy, you're talking about a public narrative. And the components in this, and these come from Marshall Gantz, who is a professor up at Harvard. And you talk about the story of self. What is my lived experience with whatever this is? The story of us. Why am I not unique and that more people in my community are experiencing this? And then why now? Like, why is now the right time to make a change? So I come from an organization that focuses on school finance. Not always the easiest thing to build a story around, right? But my examples are going to be school finance, and you can please feel free to move away from them and into your own examples. When we start with story of self, we're starting with, why do you care about this issue? Why do you care that school is 180 days if you're advocating for a 180-day school year? Why do you care about the issue that has your attention? What brought you to the point where you decided to take action on this issue? Like, something changed in you where before you were an observer and now you're going to help change this. What was that moment? And that is really an opportunity to build credibility with your listeners. It allows them to see, say, Emily as somebody that is not calling from Washington State and calling our legislators and saying this matters. And Emily really has no connection to it. She just saw a great Facebook post. This is your opportunity to say, I have a voice in this issue, and who you are provides some perspective about how you see an issue. If you're talking about schools and you're a parent, that helps provide some perspective. If you're a community member and you say, look, this is my perspective as a community member, that matters equally, but it just helps everybody know, where are you coming from? So we're going to do our first exercise. And these pieces are actually the pieces that you're going to work on in your next breakout. So feel free to jot notes on a sticky note, on a notepad, but you can also find this in your in the link tree on the breakout actions. So the hardest part is always getting started. I don't even know where to start. I'm concerned about this, but how do I start this? This is going to be really easy for you all. I want you to take a minute now and get comfortable trying this out. My name is Erica Haynes. I live in Willimantic, Connecticut, and I'm here to talk about school finance. I care about school finance because I've had 4 kids go to school in different schools and in different school districts. And every time they change, their experience changes because schools are funded differently. And my kid is still the same. So that's why I care about school finance. So you can try it on any issue. So for instance, you could say that you're concerned about early childhood experiences for kids and would like to ensure that Connecticut becomes a universal early childhood state. And then you'd have to say, why do I care about this? Why does this matter? I'm going to give you about 45 seconds to just stretch that and try it out. All right, and I'm gonna continue to move forward on this. And I just want to acknowledge, I finally had a chance to catch up on the chat. You guys are awesome. There's great stuff in there. So if the first piece was the story of self, who am I and why does this matter to me? How does this story fit into the bigger picture of schools and communities? I'm assuming today we're talking about schools and communities. How does this fit in? Is your story an anomaly, or is it something that others may experience? This matters, because if you're like, my story is the only one in the state of Connecticut like this, so I'd like you to change policy universally, that doesn't work as well as saying, I'm not unique. Other people are experiencing this, and policy has a role to play here. And then audience matters. When you go to the Norwalk Board of Education, they have a different focus than the Norwalk Common Council, has a different focus than the General Assembly. And it matters in that the story of us is different, right? If you are talking to an only Norwalk audience, or if you are talking to a statewide audience. So I want to take a look at trying this piece out. I would say not only has school finance affected me, but it affects others in my community and across the state, in that per pupil funding in the state of Connecticut ranges from $13,000 to $40,000, depending on what community you're in. And as a parent, I didn't know that, but that affects the resources our kids have in a school. And until a couple of years ago, we had a fair number of school districts using chalkboards because they couldn't afford smart boards. So do you see there, it's an opportunity to, one, tell an additional story, two, to integrate some facts, to say this isn't just a me thing. It's not a thing that just bothers me. It's not something that I just like to see change happen to, but I'm telling you there's a big problem here. So I want you to take a minute here to try it out. And again, this can be on your own issue, and I want you to just get comfortable thinking in these terms. And I'll give you about a minute. All right. I know a lot of you, as I say all right, are like, no, not all right. I'm not done. But you're, again, going to have some more time with this. And we're going to move from story of self to story of us to story of now. What choice or action are you asking people to take? Why is now the time? And when you're asking someone to take an action, they need to understand both why it's critical, but why it's also now. So what are you asking them to do? I'm asking you to vote in support of this bill. I'm asking you, if you're at the Board of Education, it might be to allocate dollars for more social workers in our schools. The time for action, if we were to look at the social worker example of adding more, funding more social work positions in Norwalk Public Schools, the time for action is now, because children have really been struggling coming out of COVID, and we're not out of COVID, and they haven't fully been supported through it or coming out of it. And we want to mitigate the emotional hurt that kids are experiencing. So, what are you asking? Why is it now? And you could also say, more social workers in Norwalk Public Schools would help kids have additional adults to talk to, and a kind of neutral, supportive party that might not be their teacher, who doesn't have the capacity. So I want you to think about that for a minute, and you're going to try it out. What are you asking? And this you can just make up. You're asking for them to vote on a bill. You're asking for them to add more funding, whatever it is you're asking for, and why now? And I'm going to do the uncomfortable silence for a minute again. And I'm going to bring us back again. And I know, once again, I'm probably cutting some of you off, but there are a few things I want you to remember when you tell your story. Who your audience is. You can have the same story, but you might just need to change it a little, not in terms of facts, but in terms of how you relay it or how it's going to impact other people, depending on if people are community members, decision makers, parents, business owners. Who are you talking to? And are they people you know or people you are speaking to for the first time? And what's their frame of reference on the issue? How knowledgeable are they, or are you going to have to build some of that knowledge? I want you to always speak your truth on the topic of whatever you're speaking on. What have you witnessed or experienced? In this case, as a result of inequitable school funding, but what have you witnessed that made you concerned? Is there a moment in time or a fact that stands out? What's that one thing? Boom, I have to, this idea or thought or experience will never go away. And how does the story evolve? Sometimes we get so caught up in making sure there's a story that we forget to wrap it up, and people are left hanging. So make sure there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a main character in your story. That's probably you or your child as a good example. And who is the story about, and how is that person relatable to your audience? Make sure that you're clear about what the problem is that you're speaking about. I come from a data organization. We're a policy think tank and data-driven organization. And I'll tell you, data should be used for impact, but definitely don't feel like you have to, your whole testimony or your whole story should be about data. Your story is the most important piece of this. And, think of this as a pick your own ending story. You're putting the listener in the position to determine the best outcome for the hero of your story. If you want more funding and that person is going to vote on more funding for schools, they need to see who's that child that's going to be impacted by that. Who's the teacher? Let them understand it's not just dollars on paper, but there's an ending that they can affect. So we're going to go back into the breakout rooms, and I'm just going to walk you through The second breakout action, if you haven't brought this up on the link tree, I'll have Jen throw the link tree in the chat one more time. And what I've put on breakout action number 2 is all of those scripts that you were drafting. And we're actually going to be in the breakout room for 10 minutes. I want you to share your name, your connection to Norwalk ACTS. If I'm assuming you're in a different room, but if you're in the same room, good for that too. And then please spend 3 minutes each sharing your story and building it. And understand the expectation is not for you to have this seamless, beautiful, perfect story, but to just get comfortable trying this out and this kind of format that walks you through it. And Emily, I think we're ready to go.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Hi, Paula.
Hi. Yeah, I'm not
Jennifer,
gonna.
you don't exist in these, there's nothing here for you. It's so
I
bizarre.
know. I know. Well, I'm busy trying to clean up all of the attendance. I got everybody in there, but I don't have everybody's email address. So my bot stopped working because if I put them in as a contact without an email, it says, oh, I can't send it to constant contact. So it's like, cart before the horse. So do you know Jen and Erica's email addresses? They did not register for this.
They did not. I don't have them. Jesse does.
Okay. That's fine. I'll get them from Jesse. So I need to manually then add certain people to the mailing list. So it's no big deal. It's only a half a dozen. And Jenny, contacted me. It's like, oh, I'm not on Backbone. I can't get. It's like, aren't you on our mailing list?
Yeah,
So,
seriously.
Yeah. So, but I never saw her email, so I'm sure she was asking around. How do I get in? How do I get in?
I mean, I saw that she registered, but it was through intern that she registered, and then she must have forgotten to
Right. And now,
re-register.
as soon as she was done, we took her off Backbone.
Right.
Suspended her account. So.
Yep. No, that makes sense.
So now everything that she gets needs to come from the mailing list.
To her personal email.
Yeah. So.
All right.
So I'll go into constant contact.
I think because Jennifer's the host that I can't put her in a room.
Hi, Tori.
Welcome back, everyone. Once again, I'm sure y'all didn't have enough time in that breakout room. I know we didn't, and we were having a blast. But what I'd like you to do is start lighting up the chat with really how that felt. And, was that a comfortable experience? Did that start giving you a little bit more power? Did that give you ideas of how you can utilize this going forward? I want to know if this is helpful for you, and if so, what particular parts were helpful. And in the meantime, I'm going to go back and share my screen one more time. We're back in this presentation here, and as always, as I scroll, my screen always lags the first time. We're going to focus now on building relationships. We've talked about what is policy, what is advocacy, how do we include storytelling, and why. And now we're going to talk about relationship building. The questions I want to explore in this few minutes are, what do we need to know to build relationships, and who do we need to build relationships with? How do we approach it? What are the different opportunities? And what types of methods are there for building relationships? So I want you to know that I'm going to focus today on how we build relationships with decision makers, but equally important, and in the breakout, we'll focus on building relationships throughout the community. And there are a few reasons for that. One, it's really lonely work to advocate and feel like you are adrift and the only one. And so connectivity is important, but the more you get to know your audience, the better as well. So let's see if my screen will stop. So you've all, I'm sure, done or heard of the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? You can take anyone in Hollywood and in 6 connections or less, bring them all back to Kevin Bacon. And so the point here is not that we are all connected to Kevin Bacon, because I've tried it and I can't get connected to him, but that we have more connectivity than we know or than we realize. And it matters who's in the space with us. So some of the key knowledge points are that relationships don't just happen. We need to think about who we want to build relationships with, who we need to build relationships with, why, and how we're going to do that. Although COVID takes away some of our options, right? You can't just bump into them at a restaurant anymore. We'll talk about that, but our lives revolve around relationships, and I've been fortunate to watch as you all see people that you know pop up on the Zoom as everybody was coming into the meeting this morning with like a hey, I haven't seen you in a long time. We are relational. And I want to share a relationship map to help, understand. And this, again, will be like a tool in your toolbox of advocacy, policy, and relationships. This relationship map kind of organizes us, helps us understand our social networks, understand roles, maybe look at communication. And when we look at ourselves, we have a couple of circles, and these probably changed a little, although my mapping hasn't, but that really intimate, who were you locked down with in the darkest days of COVID, right? That's your intimate inner circle. And moving out, you have those friends. Those were the people that you had Zoom wine with every couple of weeks and caught up with when we couldn't go out. Participation is that next circle of like, we don't know each other well enough to, go out to dinner, but we might know each other well enough to sit next to each other at a PTO meeting. And an exchange is someone where you kind of know that face and you know them from one of your orbits and you're comfortable saying, hey, but, at the root of relationships, we're really talking about how do you all connect with people, and we each do that differently. There's not one right fit. Believe it or not, I'm an introvert. I'm a huge introvert. So I relate to people by going, if I'm at a party, I'm the one in a corner and I'm looking for someone else standing in another corner. And I build relationships by corner surfing, right? There are people who are very comfortable going up to everybody in the center of the room. Who are you? And how do you move people along your relationship map? When we're talking today and building relationships, we can talk about decision makers, those who have a direct vote in the policy you're interested in, and influencers, those who don't have a direct vote but are the people that the decision maker trusts. So when an influencer talks, a decision maker listens. The best example would be a chief of staff. That would be somebody that a decision maker would listen to. And a relationship map can ultimately be transformed into a power map. Understanding your relationships and other people's relationships and how that network comes together to access people who are making decisions so that you all can talk to them. And I'll think about it in the terms that I saw at the beginning of the presentation, which is Norwalk ACTS going to support, advocate, or lead on a change policy? And if you're going to lead, you need to know who do we know, how do we access them, and how do we build that out and leverage relationships. So a power map might take from you all individually. You could put yourself in this map and say, who do I know? If you wanted to, you could put Senator Duff in the center of this and say, who does he know and who do I know? What are those 6 degrees to Senator Duff or to the superintendent of public schools? So that, while I might not know everybody, I may find that Mary Kate knows somebody who knows somebody, and we can talk about how to strategize and get through that. So I throw these maps out at you, but what mapping tells us is who we need to build relationships with in order to make change happen. How do we get a policy change to happen? Who is important? And how do we gain access to decision makers? How can we build a relationship? What type of relationship? And relationship types matter. There's the transactional, like, look, I just need this from you. You need this from me. So is there a way we can make this happen? Or is this a relational meeting where I really want to know what is important to you? We're going to identify our shared interests. We're going to stay involved, and this is a long-term relationship. Typically, transactional relationships are a little bit shorter. There's no right answer, but it's what can you get out of this? So the type of relationship determines the relationship building. Are you going to be proactive or passive? Are you waiting for them to come to you, or are you going to reach out? Is it formal or informal? If I'm reaching out to Emily to develop a relationship, that's far less formal than if I reach out to Senator Duff. Is it in person or electronic? And are you hoping to meet with this person once a month, or are you hoping to meet with them once? But I like this because I think this aligns with some of the great points you guys brought out in the advocacy and storytelling piece. In order to build effective relationships, there must be honesty, respect, care and kindness, and knowledge and facts. You can relate to people by thanking them, by asking them, by informing them, supporting, opposing, or just being a presence. So for instance, even the legislative session isn't happening, you can already start building relationships with elected officials. You can introduce yourself and say you're a member of Norwalk ACTS, that let's say it's universal early child care, universal access to pre-K. You know, that's an important topic for you, and you're going to be watching the decision maker to let them, you know, to see how they're supporting that initiative. So build relationships starting now. Clue in other interested people. Have your map connect with other people's maps. And what's exciting to me is the number of people on this call. You all can build these maps together, and Norwalk ACTS will have some great relationship maps to rely on. So in your final breakout room, you're going to go into a room that is being facilitated with a larger group. And in that, you're going to be using Jamboard. The Jamboard link, Jen Nakos, if you can just drop this into the chat and make sure everybody has access to it. If you're at home on your computer, pull up the Jamboard, because your stickies can go right here and they'll be uploaded in real time. If you need the facilitator to add stickies for you, go for it. But we want to know, what neighborhood in Norwalk are you from? Are you from East Norwalk? Are you from South Norwalk? You're going to put your neighborhood and your name. Who are some elected officials that you may have a relationship with or know? And put your name there. What schools are you connected to? Do your kids go to Norwalk High, or were you a Norwalk High grad? Is there Jefferson Elementary is down the street from you? For a lack of better term, where do you worship? Where do you practice or exercise your faith? Where do you work, or where do you have professional relationships through your work? And finally, what's your recreation? Like, are your kids in Girl Scouts? Do they play basketball at the Boys and Girls Club? I'm going to demonstrate right now. If you click on sticky note, you can write your own sticky note here. And my sticky note to you is to have, I would have said have fun. Apparently my spelling isn't great today. I can stick it and then move it to whatever column I need to. You all have the ability to do it. and I'm hoping that you will have fun with this. So with that, Emily is going to put us in larger breakout rooms, and we're going to have, Emily, can you actually limit the time to 5 minutes? We're going to have 5 minutes to do that, everybody. Have fun.
Did I just leave mine by accident? Or did you close it?
They're closing, so I think there's like 26 more seconds.
Oh, that's so interesting. I wonder why it just kicked me out.
Oh boy. Well, it wouldn't even let me put Jennifer Barahona in a group. I had to tell her to join her own group.
It's interesting too, because some of the participants in my group on Jamboard weren't seeing, like I was sharing my screen, but when they looked at their Jamboard, it was different. So, but it looks like it's populating.
All right, everybody, we are in the home stretch here. I am positive y'all did not have enough time in that. What I am telling you is that Jamboard, and I think there were some funky things with Zoom for some folks with the Jamboard being on Zoom and it just wasn't quite working. You will have access to that afterwards. So you can continue to build that. You'll be able to open it up in a link, continue to build that. And I'm going to encourage you to do that as kind of your homework assignment for Norwalk ACTS, because what you're doing is helping them understand as you all actually collectively look to support, advocate, and lead. When you fill those out, you can start seeing how can we support each other, collectively have a greater impact, and come together. So I would love to see you all continue to share your connections on that. I am going to go back to my screen for one last time. I want you to know, and I actually, more so than needing to cover it with you, want you to know that there's some quick tips for emailing in here. You know, when you never know what to put for a subject line, or if you guys are like me, and I'm always like, I start it, then I back up and wipe it all out. Then I start again, then I back up and wipe it all out. How do I start it? Just be clear and simple. There's some great tips in here about CCing and BCCing. And I can age myself and tell you that I remember the carbon copies when they were carbon copies. But when you start looking at this, it's about, do you want to include other people? And it should be an explicit conversation. Are we, emailing as 12 of us and I'll write the email, but I'll CC it? Or I just want you guys to know that I'm doing this. There are some types of emails in here. But overall, I want you to know that in any email, particularly though to decision makers, keep it short and sweet. Small number of questions, 1 to 3. If you want them to get back to you, go ahead and say that. I would like a response from you on this. And just know they're getting a ton of emails. We spend so much time crafting it, and we spend way more time crafting an email than they spend reading it. And for the final tip, I'm going to stop the share, and hopefully this kind of weaves everything together. That final tip that I left off on was be yourself. Don't be anybody else, just be yourself. If you always end your emails with, warmest regards, go ahead and do that. If I ended mine with warmest regards, people who know me would think I was being held hostage somewhere. I'm not that person. I'm the hope you're having an awesome day person. Be yourself. Be yourself in looking at policy. Be yourself when you advocate. Be yourself. And that's the key to it all. You have my contact information. Feel free to reach out. And also feel free to share feedback back to Norwalk ACTS or to me. I am always open to constructive criticism. It's how I get better. Jesse just dropped something in the chat. So with that, Jesse, I'm actually going to kick it back to you I don't know who's closing it out, but I want to be respectful of time.
Sure. Well, I wish we were in person to do a big round of applause, Erica. Thank you so much. That was an hour and a half that felt very quick, and just really appreciative of you and Jen and the School and State Finance Project. And for those who have never heard of the organization until today, I've been a really big fan of this organization, and they have so much data on making just budget. I am not confident in budget data or anything school budget related, and they do an excellent job of disseminating information and localizing it to how it's important and matters to Norwalk. So thank you so much once again. Just to close out, which we're on time, which is fantastic, I just want to kind of preview some upcoming events for 2022. As part of our policy and advocacy work, we are having a legislative forum with Norwalk's delegation, which all members will be invited to on January 20th from 8:30 to 10. And this will be a great way to interact with those legislators, build relationships, and advocate for the things that you care about. There will also be a youth town hall. We haven't determined the date because finals aren't set for January, with our Center for Youth Leadership kind of running that. There are also restorative practice trainings in January on school climate training and restorative practices. And then our next quarterly convening will be focused on data, and that will be March 15th, in a few months from now. Before I kick it to Jennifer to add some closing words, I dropped a survey in the chat asking for your feedback for today. And then if you haven't signed up for our newsletter, please do so on our website. And if you haven't signed our MOA, our Memorandum of Agreement, that's also included on our website. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer.
2 minutes to spare. Just a final show of gratitude and appreciation to Erica and Jen. I've been feeling depleted, but boy, did this restore my energy. For those who know me, I have been waiting 20 years to bring real community organizing advocacy to the community of Norwalk. But between the State and School Finance Project, our friends at Connect that we're meeting with next year, the Faith Acts and others, I really am feeling very excited to go into this next legislative session more organized and empowered with this wonderful community who is more equipped now to tell their stories, and it just resonated so much. Practice your stories over the holidays with your friends and families. Think about the policies you want to be moving the needle on. I told my small group that I will be at our own Board of Education meeting this evening to be advocating for making the Black and Latino Studies course count as a history requirement and not as an elective. So whether it's small local in your community or big state or federal, get active. We need everybody and their voices. So thank you so much to all of you for all of your hard work and dedication all year. And I really hope that you have some rest and time to restore over the holidays. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.